Beneath the surface of history lie secrets darker than the battles themselves, whispers of shadows stalking men, of truths buried beneath steel and silence. What you are about to hear is not found in textbooks or official archives. It is a story folded into the cold depths of the ocean, where courage meets the unknown, and where the line between reality and nightmare blurs. Brace yourself, for some mysteries should never be uncovered. The dawn mist clung to the hills of Normandy like a secret. In a countryside saturated with green and silence, the steady march of war was approaching. But on the morning of June 2, 1944, no one in the quiet village of St. Clement knew just how close history was to taking a different shape. The world would come to know Operation Overlord as a defining moment of the Second World War. But deep in the woods beyond the hedgerows, a parallel mission unfolded, unknown to most, Operation Serpent. And at its heart was a 19-year-old girl with ink-stained fingers and the fire of resistance in her blood, Eloise Lambert. Eloise had been a courier for the French resistance since the spring of 1943. Her father, a schoolteacher executed by the Gestapo for hiding weapons in his library, had whispered his final words to her through a crack in a holding cell wall: "Write everything and do not stop." She obeyed. Her notebooks, written in invisible lemon juice and tucked in the lining of her coat, had carried coded messages between cells across Normandy. But when she received instructions from London via a scrambled BBC broadcast, "La mer est rouge ce soir," Eloise knew this mission was different. It was no longer about words. It was about action. The Allies had identified a railway bridge near St. Clement as critical to German logistics. It carried munitions, armor, and troops from inland depots to the coast. If the bridge remained intact during the invasion, the Wehrmacht's panzer divisions could be redirected to the beaches of Normandy in hours. The Allies couldn't risk a direct bombing. It might alert the Germans that an invasion was imminent. Instead, they turned to the resistance and the British Special Operations Executive. 3 British agents parachuted into the nearby marshes under cover of night. Major Ian Calder, a demolitions expert with a face like granite and a heart buried somewhere beneath it. Corporal Yusuf Malik, a Pakistani wireless operator fluent in French. And Lieutenant Annie Bridgman, a former Cambridge student and sharpshooter who had left academia for sabotage. Eloise met them under an old stone viaduct, introducing herself with the resistance code, "I read books in the dark." Annie replied, "And I light candles in libraries." The bridge was heavily guarded, camouflaged with tarpaulins and surrounded by anti-personnel mines. The Germans believed it untouchable. Eloise spent 2 days sketching guard routines, train schedules, and the layout of the sentry posts. At night, she guided the agents through hedgerows and goat trails. They wore German uniforms stripped from corpses and moved only when the church bell struck the hour, muffling their steps in ancient echoes. They rehearsed the demolition in an abandoned apple orchard. Annie wept quietly after each run, clutching a photograph of her brother who had died at El Alamein. On the 3rd night, they received a message from London via Yusuf's crackling wireless: "Tiger moving east." Repeat: "Tiger moving east." It was coded confirmation that a panzer battalion was scheduled to move across the bridge within 72 hours. That gave them only one window, between the last supply train at 2 a.m. and the arrival of the battalion at dawn 2 days later. What they didn't know was that the message had been intercepted. An Abwehr double agent embedded in London had fed false codes to Berlin, and the Germans now knew resistance activity was brewing in the region. They didn't know exactly where or when, but they tripled patrols and sent a detachment of SS officers to St. Clement under the guise of inspecting local farms. Eloise's family home was searched. Her mother, mute from shell shock, sat knitting with eyes wide open as soldiers ransacked her kitchen. They missed the microfilm canister under the floorboards by inches. On the night of June 4th, under a moon as pale as bone, the team made their final approach. Eloise had memorized every detail. 3 guards rotated every 90 minutes, the eastern pylon had a maintenance hatch with a blind spot, and the train conductor smoked Turkish cigarettes, meaning he would be delayed at the cafe for his ritual espresso. At exactly 1:38 a.m., Major Calder placed the first shaped charge beneath the central strut. At 1:44, Yusuf finished wiring the detonator. At 1:47, Annie signaled with a matchstick flame. The countdown began, and then the dogs barked. A patrol had shifted routes. Whether by accident or anticipation, 3 German soldiers emerged from the treeline just as Calder emerged from the crawlspace. Gunfire cracked through the air. Annie dropped 2 with precise shots, but the third screamed into his radio. Eloise ran, fast and reckless, to draw the rest away. She led them into the orchard, zigzagging between trees, bullets tearing bark around her. She was captured by dawn. The bridge exploded at 2:01 a.m., just as the first light of morning touched the river. A train carrying fuel and ammunition for the Panzer Division derailed and burst into flame. The blast echoed for miles. Allied commanders later confirmed the delay it caused gave the 82nd Airborne time to secure key positions inland during the D-Day landings. Without that window, they might have faced panzers at Saint-Mère-Église. Eloise Lambert was tortured for 12 days. Her captors believed she was merely a messenger, but her silence frustrated them. On the 13th day, she was moved to a transit prison near Rennes. And then, she vanished. The British never confirmed her death. After the war, Major Calder returned to St. Clement and placed a rose atop the ruins of the bridge. He later testified that Eloise had saved the entire operation. In the 1970s, an old woman cleaning out her attic found a dusty leather-bound notebook sealed inside a coffee tin. Inside were pages written in lemon juice, faint messages, coordinates, sketches of bridges, and one haunting phrase scrawled again and again. "We are the ghost between the wires." To this day, the story of Operation Serpent remains absent from most official records. But to the village of St. Clement, Eloise Lambert is no ghost. She is the girl with ink on her hands who rewrote history one silent step at a time. The ink on the final page had not yet dried when the diary was found, buried in the crushed cockpit of a Mitsubishi Zero pulled from the ocean floor in 1967. The diver who retrieved it was looking for scrap metal. What he discovered instead was the last testament of Masaru Okabe, a 17-year-old student turned kamikaze pilot, conscripted during the final throes of Japan's dying empire. Born in 1928 in Kagoshima, Masaru was the son of a naval mechanic and a schoolteacher. His early life was defined by war propaganda and the rigid doctrine of the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere. He excelled in mathematics and calligraphy. By age 13, he had written award-winning essays on the divine soul of the emperor, and recited wartime poems with such fervor that his instructors called him a perfect mirror of Yamato's spirit. But Masaru was not immune to doubt. His older brother Kenji, a naval officer, died during the Battle of Midway. His father never spoke of it. His mother cried only once, then never again. In March of 1945, Masaru was summoned to an assembly at his middle school. An officer from the Imperial Army, dressed in starched whites and polished boots, stood before a hall of students and announced the call for final service. "The homeland is sacred," he said, "and you, sons of the Sun Goddess, are its last shield." Masaru did not volunteer. He was volunteered. Within days, he was transferred to the Kyushu Air Base and given a training uniform 2 sizes too large. Training for kamikaze pilots was not about flight. It was about surrender. Surrender of fear. Surrender of hesitation. Surrender of life. Masaru's diary begins on his 3rd day at the base. April 2nd, today, they gave us each a white scarf. They call it the headband of eternity. It feels like silk. I wonder who wove it. Was it someone's mother? A girl in a factory? They say we will wear it as we touch the sky. The diary is meticulous, yet haunting. Masaru documents every day with ritualistic precision. The taste of barley rice, the ache in his arms after push-ups, the crackling broadcast of the emperor's voice over the barracks loudspeaker. But between the lines, another Masaru emerges. One who doodles birds on the page margins. One who remembers how Kenji used to flick rice grains at him across the dinner table. One who writes, in a moment of rare honesty, "I think of my mother's hands. I have never seen them still." On April 18th, Masaru was officially assigned to the 72nd Shinpu Tokubetsu Kogekitai Special Attack Unit. His mission: to crash his aircraft, laden with 250 kilograms of high explosive, into the deck of the American aircraft carrier USS Bunker Hill. He was told the ship carried hundreds of planes that threatened the homeland, that his death would delay the enemy's advance, that one man's life could equal the lives of 10,000. April 19th, we were told that our bodies will become thunder, that we will return to the sea as droplets of honor. I write this down so I do not forget. Thunder does not ask to fall. It is only summoned. In the final days of his training, Masaru practiced dive angles and learned how to hold the plane steady even while aflame. He was shown film reels of successful kamikaze strikes, most of them grainy, ending in fireballs and cheers. Each morning, they were given a teaspoon of sake and ordered to write a farewell letter to their families. Masaru wrote 5. He burned 4. The last one he folded into a crane and placed inside his flight jacket. On May 3rd, Masaru and 3 other pilots were scheduled for deployment. They were served red bean cakes, an uncommon luxury. They bowed in silence before the portrait of Emperor Hirohito. Masaru's hands shook. He wrote, "The sky is cloudless today. It feels wrong." Then came the twist, one never recorded in official military logs. Just hours before takeoff, Masaru's plane malfunctioned. The engine flooded on the tarmac. While his comrades launched into the horizon, vanishing into flame and steel, Masaru was ordered to stand by. He watched the sky until it was empty. The hangar crew offered him condolences as if at a funeral. He was reassigned for the next wave, 2 days later. But something had shifted inside him. May 4th, I do not feel shame. I feel something I cannot name. The clouds today looked like paper, thin, torn, floating. Masaru began to wander the base at night, sitting beneath the wings of grounded planes, staring at the stars. He no longer saluted with enthusiasm. He began to ask questions in whispers. Do they feel it when they hit? What if the ship turns? What if I miss? One night, he heard the base priest muttering prayers for men who had already flown. Masaru knelt beside him and whispered, "I don't think the gods want this." His commanding officer noticed the change. On May 7th, Masaru was summoned for moral recalibration. He was struck across the face and locked in isolation for 36 hours. When released, he did not speak. But his diary continued. May 8th. There is a silence in me now. I have decided. I will fly. But I will not die for a lie. On May 9th, Masaru launched. The mission was simple. Fly low, under radar, strike the Bunker Hill at 0700 hours. But Masaru did something no one expected. After breaking formation, he ascended. Higher than required. So high, in fact, that his wingmen assumed engine failure and continued without him. He flew out over the ocean, past the target zone. He never descended. Instead, he veered toward the open sea, climbing steadily, then vanished off radar. No impact was recorded. No explosion. No wreckage found. 4 years, it was believed he perished. But then came the diary, discovered in the cockpit of a wreck 70 kilometers east of the mission area, intact beneath years of salt and sand. The final entry read, May 9th, the sea is infinite. So is the truth. If anyone finds this, know that I did not fear death. I feared never choosing. Masaru Okabe's name was never engraved on any monument. His mother was told he died in glorious sacrifice. But in secret, a shrine was built in Kagoshima, with a paper crane sealed in glass. The inscription reads, He rose, but did not fall. To this day, no record confirms his defection. His story exists only in pages soaked with salt, ink, and a boy's final defiance. Winter arrived early in Leningrad in 1941, and by the time the snows hardened into walls of ice, the siege had begun. For 872 days, the city starved and bled under the iron ring of the German Wehrmacht. The Nazis called it Operation Northern Light. The Soviets called it resistance. But in the heart of that frozen hell, one woman came to embody something stranger than survival, grace in the face of annihilation. Her name was Irina Volkova, once a ballet dancer with the Kirov Theater, and by the end, known simply as the Ice Widow. Irina was 26 when the bombs fell on the Smolny district. She had married her childhood friend Anton, a violinist, the year before the war. Their flat overlooked the Fontanka River, and she often joked that the canal's frozen surface made a better stage than the one at the Mariinsky. She danced even when the theater dimmed its lights for rationing. When the sirens began and the first Luftwaffe squadrons tore the sky apart, Irina was rehearsing Giselle. The piano stopped. The building trembled. Outside, winter and war arrived as one. Anton was conscripted within days. Irina stood in a line of women waiting for their rations as he marched off with a rifle he barely knew how to hold. She never saw him again. He died in December at the front, his body left buried beneath the snow somewhere near Mga. A letter arrived weeks later, blood-stained and smudged. "Your love is the only warmth I carry." By January of 1942, the city was a mausoleum. Temperatures fell to -30 degrees Celsius. People ate wallpaper paste and sawdust bread. Corpses froze upright in alleys. Irina, emaciated and wrapped in a moth-eaten coat, began volunteering as a body collector. She hauled sleds of the dead across boulevards, placing them in makeshift morgues behind shuttered bakeries. One day, she found a girl, 6 years old, blue-lipped and silent, curled in the corner of a collapsed stairwell, clutching a doll with no head. The child's name was Polina. Irina didn't ask if her parents were dead. She knew. Irina brought Polina to the subcellar of the old Mariinsky Theater. It was abandoned now, save for crates of torn costumes, broken lights, and a cracked bust of Tchaikovsky. She hung thick blankets over the ventilation ducts, lit candles made from hardened animal fat, and tucked Polina into a nest of fur coats. They survived on beet peelings and melted snow. At night, Irina hummed pieces of Swan Lake, her voice hoarse but determined. She still danced sometimes, barefoot on the dusty stage. Polina would clap with hands like twigs. More children came. By March, Irina had gathered 11 orphans, found in stairwells, under market stalls, in burnt-out trolley cars. They called her Mama Irina. She rationed food with mathematical precision. They slept in a circle, bodies pressed together like coals. She taught them to recite Pushkin and perform simple pantomimes to stay warm. Her ballerina's discipline became their salvation. One child recalled later, "We forgot the bombs when we pretended to be clouds." Outside, death ruled. The Germans shelled the city daily. The NKVD executed anyone suspected of hoarding. Hunger turned some civilians into cannibals. Irina refused to let the children leave the theater. "We are ghosts," she told them. "Ghosts do not open the door." One day, a German leaflet fell from the sky, promising bread and safety for those who surrendered. Polina read it aloud. The youngest boy, Mitya, cried for real bread. Irina burned the leaflet in front of them and said, "A wolf does not give bread. It gives a knife." That night, she danced again, slow and fluid, her arms painting circles in the air. Her ribs showed through her blouse. The children watched in silence, afraid that if they blinked, she might vanish. In December 1942, during the harshest part of the second winter, the theater was hit by artillery fire. The roof collapsed above the dressing rooms. Irina shielded the children with her body as the walls cracked. Dust and snow poured in. Polina's leg was broken. Irina carried her to the cellar, her breath rasping with each step. Blood ran from her shoulder. She stitched it herself with thread pulled from a costume. She never cried. When the first relief convoys crossed the ice of Lake Ladoga, the so-called Road of Life, in early 1943, the city began to stir. Trucks brought flour and coal. Music played faintly from surviving radios. The siege was not yet broken, but hope had returned. Irina led the children, one by one, through the frozen streets to the nearest aid station. Nurses wept to see them alive. She refused transport for herself until every child was registered. When finally asked for her name, she replied only, "I am their shadow." She collapsed 2 days later. Pneumonia had filled her lungs. Malnutrition had eaten her bones. She died in a cot beneath a Soviet flag, with Polina holding her hand. Her last words, whispered like a dance cue, were, "Lift your arms and rise." After the siege lifted in January 1944, a nurse found Irina's belongings in a bundle: a faded photograph of Anton, a child's drawing of the theater, and a single worn point shoe. Her name never made it into the official war records. No medals, no rank. Just one obituary in the Leningrad Journal, buried beneath reports of tank production and artillery movement. Unknown civilian died of exposure. Found protecting 11 orphans during bombardment. Identity confirmed by survivors. Former dancer. Decades later, Polina Volkova, who took Irina's name in tribute, became director of the Mariinsky Ballet. On the 60th anniversary of the siege's end, she staged The Ice Widow, a performance based on Irina's life. Survivors wept in the audience. One elderly man whispered, "She didn't survive the war, but she survived being forgotten." Today, in a small chamber beneath the Mariinsky, a plaque marks the place where Irina kept her family of shadows alive. It reads, "In memory of the dancer who gave children a stage in the dark." And every winter, on the coldest night, someone leaves a single pair of ballet slippers at the door. In 1943, the New Mexico desert was alive with whispers of impossible science, of strange flashes in the night, of a war ending not in trenches but in thunder. Officially, the place was known as Los Alamos Laboratory. Unofficially, it was simply the Hill. But hidden beneath the white coats, chalkboards, and government seals was another secret. A man named Dr. Walter Engel, theoretical physicist, trusted assistant to Robert Oppenheimer, and Soviet informant. Engel's story was nearly erased. Most documents bearing his name were redacted, burned, or lost in the bureaucratic maze between the War Department and the Office of Strategic Services. But fragments remained. Letters without return addresses. A few grainy surveillance photographs. And most damning of all, a single intercepted telegram sent from Santa Fe to Moscow in July 1945. "Fire has shape. We'll strike east next." Walter Engel was born in Milwaukee in 1907, the son of German immigrants. Quiet, withdrawn, with a stutter that vanished when he spoke of equations. He studied physics at the University of Chicago under Enrico Fermi and published early work on neutron diffusion. In 1942, his fluency in Russian and his political leanings, quiet sympathies with labor movements, and obsession with economic equality, were noted by both the FBI and the NKVD. The Soviets approached him through a librarian at the University of California, Berkeley. He didn't agree immediately, but after a drunken argument with a colleague about American imperialism, he sent a reply, "I believe truth should belong to all." He was recruited into the Manhattan Project through Oppenheimer himself, who called him brilliant and gentle, but too alone. Engel worked on neutron reflectors, metal configurations used to contain and amplify atomic reactions. His job was obscure enough to avoid scrutiny, but critical enough to touch the heart of the bomb. He was given clearance to witness the Trinity test. From that moment on, the betrayal began. Using a technique the Soviets code-named Dampfglas, Engel encoded data within musical notation. He wrote false compositions for violin, which were in fact technical breakdowns of core configurations and yield estimates. These compositions were passed through a woman named Katya Chernov, a Soviet cultural attaché, embedded at the Mexican embassy. She met Engel twice a month at a diner called Roadrunner Cafe. He always ordered black coffee and blueberry pie. She always wore gloves, no matter the heat. In early 1945, Oppenheimer grew uneasy. Something in Engel's questions had shifted. He no longer asked why, but when. Engel began recording details of bomb casing dimensions, implosion lens calibration, and ignition sequencing. He copied memos and slipped them into hollowed-out physics textbooks. Once, he smuggled plutonium data inside a children's pop-up book about volcanoes. He wrote in his personal notes, "To give only one side a hammer is to let only one side build or destroy." After the Trinity explosion in July 1945, Engel requested leave. He drove alone into the Sangre de Cristo Mountains and camped for 3 days. According to one Soviet file, this was when he decided he would not vanish. He would stay, to atone, or perhaps to bear witness. But the Americans were closing in. A counterintelligence officer, Lieutenant Graham Bishop, began tracking inconsistencies in lab file access. Engel's logs were too perfect, too consistent, like they'd been forged in hindsight. Bishop followed him for 2 weeks, documenting meetings, reading his discarded notes. He intercepted a coded radio transmission from a station outside Taos. It repeated only once, "Engel stable. Eclipse complete." On August 6th, the bomb fell on Hiroshima. Engel was in the mess hall, drinking weak coffee when someone turned on the radio. The announcer used words like unprecedented, absolute, decisive. He excused himself and went to the lavatory, where he vomited. That night, he walked the perimeter of the lab barefoot, whispering names under his breath. Children's names. Japanese names. Names he had never heard but felt in his bones. On August 9th, Nagasaki burned. 2 days later, Engel attempted to flee. He left a sealed envelope in his desk, addressed to anyone who finds this afterward. It read, "I gave them the fire so no one would own it alone. I thought if two had the match, neither would strike it. I was wrong. And now the ash falls on everyone." He was intercepted at a rail station in Albuquerque. Witnesses claimed he offered no resistance. He simply sat on the platform bench, humming Shostakovich's String Quartet No. 8, staring at the sun as if it might explode. The U.S. government denied everything. Official records state Engel was transferred to an army facility for psychiatric evaluation and later reassigned. No trial. No charges. No media. Some believe he was absorbed into Operation Paperclip under a false name. Others believe he was quietly executed. One rumor suggests he lived in Czechoslovakia under the alias Joseph Wenzel, teaching physics to deaf students. But no proof has ever emerged. The Soviets, for their part, erased him too. In post-war Moscow, Chernov was purged during Stalin's paranoia over foreign corruption. Her final report simply said, "The eclipse was successful. The sky is no longer black for only one." Today, a replica of Engel's laboratory stands at Los Alamos, preserved for educational purposes. Tourists walk past his workbench without knowing the weight of its silence. In the museum's archives, a violin sits behind glass. The label reads, "Unclaimed. Donor unknown." It is tuned, though no one plays it. And somewhere in the back pages of history, Dr. Walter Engel remains a phantom, a man who split the atom, then split himself, in a desperate gamble to balance the unbalanceable. A ghost of two empires. A traitor to one. A savior to none. In the depths of the North Atlantic, where the sun rarely pierces the waves and pressure crushes steel like paper, something was lost in February 1944. A German U-boat, U-713, vanished without trace after transmitting a single cryptic message, "Schatten on board." A shadow on board. For decades, it was dismissed as superstition, one more casualty of a brutal undersea war. But recently uncovered Kriegsmarine logs, decrypted OSS communications, and the recovered dive records of British sonar operator Edward Bristow have forced historians to re-examine what truly happened beneath the surface. U-713 was a Type VIIC submarine, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Eric Wachter, a seasoned officer known for his mechanical brilliance and unsettling calm. The boat launched from Bergen, Norway, in late January 1944. Its mission: patrol Allied shipping routes between Iceland and Greenland and intercept resupply convoys en route to Britain. It carried 46 crewmen, 12 torpedoes, and enough food for 60 days. Though by day 30, the bread would mold and the sausages would crawl. Wachter had a reputation for discipline. His men called him Der Seher, the seer, not because of any mysticism but for his uncanny ability to predict enemy routes. He never spoke of family, never drank. He read Goethe in the torpedo room between sonar pings. According to the Kriegsmarine's own logs, U-713 made contact with convoy HX-276 on February 8. 2 freighters were torpedoed and sank within 20 minutes. But instead of retreating, Wachter lingered. Allied sonar operators picked up erratic pings, circles, zigzags, stops, as if the sub were turning back on itself. Then came the message, Schatten an Bord, position unknown. And then, nothing. No further transmissions. No debris. No oil slick. No wreck found. British naval intelligence, already monitoring Axis naval traffic through Project Ultra, flagged the message. The phrase, shadow on board, triggered alarm in Whitehall, where intelligence officers feared internal sabotage, possibly a Soviet mole, or worse, Allied deception. But it was sonar officer Edward Bristow who became obsessed. Bristow had been tracking U-boat frequencies aboard the HMS Narcissus, a convoy escort ship fitted with early experimental sonar. He later wrote in a classified report that U-713 had a pulse like no other sub, like it was listening to itself. On February 10th, Bristow's instruments picked up a strange pattern, 3 long sonar pings, then 1 short burst, repeated every 12 minutes. Morse code? Mechanical failure? Or a distress signal? He logged the pattern and requested to follow it. His captain denied him. They had orders to protect the convoy, not chase phantoms. That night, Bristow dreamed of hollow hulls echoing with whispers. He began calling the pings, the Gray Sea's heartbeat. 2 months later, U-713 was declared lost with all hands. The Kriegsmarine blamed Allied depth charges. The Allies blamed bad navigation. Both were wrong. In 1989, a Norwegian oil survey off the Greenland shelf detected unusual magnetic anomalies. In 2003, a joint German-British expedition confirmed what no one expected. The wreck of U-713, upright, intact, and resting 4,200 meters below the surface. It showed no signs of damage. No hull breach. No implosion. Hatches sealed. Torpedoes undisturbed. More disturbing was the logbook, found sealed in a watertight compartment. The last entry, dated February 9th, was in Wachter's handwriting. Crew reporting unusual sounds. Scratches in outer hull. Whispering in ballast compartment. Torpedo room light flickers. No source found. Obersturman reports seeing second sonar contact that matches our signal. Shadow image. Engine purring differently. Crew morale low. We are not alone. Divers who entered the wreck described eerie conditions. No signs of panic, no scrawled farewells, no emergency measures taken. Bunks made, equipment stowed, as if the crew had simply vanished. One diver claimed that inside the radio room, the speaker emitted faint static, even though no power source remained. A segment of preserved wire tape, analyzed by audio historians, produced faint acoustic signatures. They include the overlapping voices of several crew members speaking at once, in German, but slightly out of sync, as though recorded at different speeds. One repeated word stood out. Zurich. Return. Today, some believe U-713 suffered a psychological collapse, the stress of isolation and silence turning men into ghosts before the sea could. Submariners were known to suffer from auditory hallucinations, paranoia, even group delusions. The German Navy's medical branch documented cases of sailors convinced they were being watched from the inside of the hull. But Bristow, in his final journal entry before retirement in 1957, offered another theory. There are places in the ocean that do not belong to us. Depths we mistake for silence. I believe U-713 did not malfunction. It obeyed something older than war. Something that called back. His notes were filed away under personal conjecture. The German government classified U-713's final records until 2015. Today, They are part of a special exhibit at the Naval History Museum in Kiel. The recovered sonar log plays on loop. Every 12 minutes, visitors hear the pattern Bristow first recorded, 3 long pulses, 1 short. A sound like a heartbeat, or a warning. Of the 46 crewmen, not a single body was recovered. No signs of violence. No evidence of sabotage. Just an empty ship at the bottom of a gray sea, its final message echoing across the decades. Schatten an Bord. Whatever followed them into the deep, it did not leave. And whatever it was, it listened. The ocean keeps its secrets well, swallowing ships and souls alike, but some echoes refuse to fade. U-713's last message still pulses through the depths, a ghostly heartbeat warning us that beneath the gray waves, something listens. Something that waits. And when you hear that sound, remember, some shadows are not meant to be chased, for they might be waiting to pull you into the deep, forever lost beneath the silent sea.